Hello friends, welcome to my new lecture. As I promised in my earlier lecture to you all that I'll be conducting a series of lectures on what I have given the name of the series as Glossary of Cultural Studies. So this is the second lecture in the series of Glossary to Cultural Studies, and today the terms that I will be talking about, I will be first starting with the term called counterculture. Now, what do we exactly mean by counterculture? If we bifurcate the word counter and culture, we will understand that counter is something which we do as a result of something. So B counters A, or A counters the predecessor. So countering is that. So why is it necessary to have this definition called counterculture, and why did counterculture evolve? Counterculture evolved because of a dominant culture and the differences of a group of people or a particular society. Within that society, the differences that crop up with the dominant culture results in a counterculture. So if we look into the etymological meaning, the idea of counterculture, it refers to the values, to the beliefs, and to the attitudes. That is, the culture of a minority group. That is in opposition to the mainstream or the ascendant, the dominant culture. So, further, if we elaborate it, that counterculture is articulate and self-conscious in its opposition to values of the governing culture. The governing culture here means the culture which is the dominant culture, in a way that distinguishes it from the subculture. So counterculture basically is a culture, is a system of values, beliefs and attitudes which is formed by the minority group against or in opposition with the mainstream or the majority culture. Now counterculture might oppose the mass culture. Okay, so there can be an opposition against the mass culture. There can be an opposition by a group of people or minority group, or it can also oppose the middle class culture values. Counterculture is sometimes conceptualized in terms of generational conflict and rejection of the older or the adult values. For example, if we talk about the Beat generation, Beat generation can be considered as a counterculture to the mainstream culture. So that is what the example here is, that counterculture is sometimes conceptualized in terms of the generation that the conflict that arises due to the generational gaps and the rejection of the older or the adult values by a group of people. Now counterculture may or may not be explicitly political. It is not necessary that it is political, and we cannot negate the fact also. So it may or may not be political in nature. It typically involves the criticism or rejection of currently powerful institutions with a hope for a better life or a new society. It also does not look favorably to party politics or authoritarianism. Counterculture. Now, if we talk from the perspective of cultural studies, this counterculture is particularly associated with the cultural and political movements and formation during the 1960s and 70s, which took place in Britain and the United States, from where this particular concept of counterculture from the perspective of cultural studies emerged. Now, example from this perspective of cultural studies of counterculture, which emerged in the 1960s and 70s in Britain and America. One of the examples, and a very famous example, is the hippie culture, the hippie movement in America. In the 1960s, what did the hippie movement have? The hippie movement basically had the themes of dropping out, the themes of sexual liberation, drug use, and the display of the hairstyle and clothing as self-conscious cultural and political statements. These are very self-consciously done in order to negate or in order to raise a voice against the dominant culture, against the culture which is dominating the society, with the hope of a better future. So the example, a very pertinent example from the 1960s and 70s counterculture which emerged in America and Britain is the hippie culture. Now if we take the example of the city San Francisco, and most importantly the district of Haight-Ashbury, or we can say the music of Bob Dylan, along with the writings of Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, Harry Marcuse. These are all were component parts of a cultural movement whose symbolic high point was the Woodstock Festival. These are all the examples of bits and pieces of counterculture movement, because as we said that this is a movement which is done consciously by a minority group. And counterculture is a very important term from the field of cultural studies. Technically, this term was introduced by Theodore Roszak, Theodore, Theodore Roszak, Roszak. Theodore Roszak made a study. The study name is The Making of a Counterculture. In this particular creation called The Making of Counterculture, which was published in 1971 by Theodore Roszak, he introduced this term called counterculture. Now, if we want to conclude in one sentence or two sentences what exactly do we mean by counterculture, then we can say that counterculture basically is a subculture whose values and norms of behavior, they differ substantially. It's a subculture whose values and norms differ substantially from those of the mainstream society. And why it differs? The main intention is the opposition of the mainstream cultural mode. So it's an expression of it's an opposition against the mainstream culture, and it is done very consciously. So this is what we mean by counterculture. The second term glossary that I will talk today is a very important glossary, and we all know about it, but we just need to clarify certain points of that glossary, because that word, that term we all know, and that is the second glossary or the second term today which I am discussing in my series of Glossary of Cultural Studies is, second term is cultural capital. What do we mean by cultural capital, and how is it different from economic capital and social capital? Now, cultural capital, basically a term, this was developed and popularized by the late 20th century French sociologist called Pierre Bourdieu, Pierre, Bourdieu, Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist, popularized this culture in the later half of the 20th century, and this he used for the first time, the term he used for the first time with Jean-Claude Passon in 1973 in a work called Cultural Reproduction and Social Reproduction. In this work, he used the term called, Bourdieu used the term called cultural capital. Now, then this concept, this term was further developed in his landmark work, which was published in 1979, and the landmark work's name is Distinction, a Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste. This landmark work by Bourdieu, which was published in 1979, this concept of cultural capital was developed at length. Now, what do we exactly mean by cultural capital? Cultural capital is the accumulation. We need to pay attention here. Cultural capital is the accumulation of knowledge, behavior, skills that one can tap, one can get, have in oneself in order to demonstrate one's cultural competence and thus one's social status standing in the society. I repeat, cultural capital is the accumulation. It's an accumulation of what? It's an accumulation of behavior, knowledge, and the skills that one can acquire or one can tap into demonstrate what? Demonstrate one's cultural competence, how competent I am in my culture. And thus, if I am able to showcase my competence, I am showcasing my social status that I have in the society. Now, in the initial writing on the topic, Bourdieu and Passeron, they asserted that this accumulation was used to reinforce class differences, as historically, and very much which is still pertinent today also, different groups of people have access to different sources and forms of knowledge depending on other variable factors. And what are the other variable factors? Such as race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nationality, religion, and even age also. So if I have a reach over a particular resource, for example, I study in a particular school. Why do I study in that particular school? My studying in that particular school is governed by many factors. And what are those factors? That which is called here as variables. Which are those factors? That factor is my race, my class, my gender, my sexuality, my ethnicity, my nationality, my religion. And at the end of the lecture, I will say how the economic capital is complementary to social capital and cultural capital, and how these three are interrelated and interchangeably they are dependent on this. Now, cultural capital, if I want to explain, basically we need to explain it, I need to explain it in three categories. One, cultural capital in the form of an embodied state. What do I mean by cultural capital in the form of an embodied state? For this concept more fully to understand, it is useful to break it down to a group into three categories. I told you the first category is the embodied state. And what do I mean by cultural capital in an embodied state? That is the knowledge that we acquire over time through socialization and education exists within us. So the society in which I am born and brought up, and the education that I receive in that particular society, that is inside me, that is existing inside me. The more we acquire certain forms of embodied cultural capital, like say for example, the more we acquire knowledge of any form, it can be music, it can be anything, the more we acquire knowledge, and what happens? The more we are primed to seek and acquire more of it and things like that. But like human beings' needs never end. The more we get, the more we want. And this particular knowledge, for example, which I have acquired through my gender, class, ethnicity, all these factors, has played very significant role in my gaining that knowledge. That knowledge remains within me, and the more it gets inside me, the more I want it. I will explain it further. Now, in terms of norms, suppose more and skills, mores and skills, like for example, the table manners that I have, the language that I use, and the gendered behavior, my behavior towards genders, different genders, my behavior which I have, this often act out and display my embodied cultural capital as we move through the world and we perform it as we interact with others. What do I mean by that? I mean the knowledge, the social status, all these things which I have acquired over a period of time, in which many factors have played a crucial role. When that is manifested through my behavior, through my language, through my approach to treatment of different genders, it is manifested, that knowledge which I have already acquired. So these all culmination of all these things is an umbrella term. We call it cultural capital. So the first point that I talked about, I told you cultural capital can be discussed in 3 points, 3 main points. One is cultural capital in embodied state. The second is cultural capital in an objectified state. Now, embodiment, I have told you, I have explained how education and all is manifested through our behaviors and all those things. Now, when I say my second point, that is cultural capital in objectified state, obviously I am talking about objects, I am talking about materialistic pleasures, I am talking about materialistic things. Let us see what is it. Now, cultural capital also exists in objectified state. Now, what is that? This refers to the materials or objects we own. We buy, which might relate, and there can be a variety of material, plethora of materials that we mean by this point called objectified state. It can be, for example, suppose I am inclined to education, I am a teacher, suppose. So my objectified state are the books and computers that I have, the job. For example, if job is my objectified state, so the tools and equipments that we have, how we dress, how we have the accessories along with the dress, how do we carry the dress along with the accessories, the durable goods that I have, the necessity things as well as the aristocratic things as well as the designer things that I have in my house. For example, my furniture, appliances and the decorative items, and even the food I purchase and prepare. All these are forms of objectified states. And what is this objectified state? What does this signify? It gives the signal to those people around me. Suppose whatever I am buying, I am wearing, I am carrying, I am eating, it gives a signal about me to the people around me who is surrounding me, be it my colleague, my students, my neighbors. What is the signal they are getting? The signal is how much cultural capital I have, how much cultural capital I possess, and how much I continue to acquire it. And of course, if you talk about these cultural capital, then obviously somewhere we are also signifying or giving a clear signal to what? To our economic class. And that is why I said that cultural capital is somehow related to economic capital, and economic capital somehow related to social capital, and all these are interrelated terms. Now the third state is, first is cultural capital I have discussed in embodied state, second cultural capital in objectified state, and the third and the last is cultural capital in an institutionalized state. What is institutionalized state? Cultural capital also exists in institutionalized state. What does it mean? It refers to the ways in which cultural capital is measured, certified, ranked. What is my status? Am I a graduate? Am I a master? Am I a PhD holder? Do I have 10 years of experience? All these all these certificates, all these experience that I have, it is categorized under cultural capital in institutionalized state. So the academic qualifications, the degrees are examples. The job title, I am an assistant professor, or suppose I am a principal of a school. The religious titles that I might be having, be it any religion, the title that really I am practicing the religion, or the political office that I am holding. Suppose I am the director, or I am the MLA or the MP, or the roles that I also embark in my home as a husband, as a son, as a brother, as a father, and all these comes under the category of heading is cultural capital under institutionalized state. Baudieu here emphasized that cultural capital exists in a system of exchange. This is what I am saying. What is the system of exchange? Exchange with what? Economic and social capital. They are complementary to each other, and they are interrelated to each other. When you talk cultural capital as an objectified state, and I say that all the things that I own, be it my dress, be it my home appliances, that means somewhere or the other economy is taken into account. So economic capital of course refers to the money, wealth, where social capital that I am talking about refers to the collection of social relation that I have at my disposal. For example, my peers, my friends, my family members, my teachers, my fellow mates, my employers, my employees, my colleagues, my community members, all these falls under the category of social capital. And when you talk of economic capital, of course the economic capital is the money that I am talking about. And this is what I am talking is all these three, social, cultural and economic capital, they are interrelated and they are exchanged with each other. That is what is important. They are exchanged, and it is significant that they are interchangeably, they can be used, and interchangeably they are related. So cultural capital is very, very significant from the cultural studies point of view. I hope I have been able to give you an outline of these two very important terms. One is counterculture and one is cultural capital. And as I have promised, I will continue this series of lectures under the title Glossary of Cultural Studies. This was the second video that I have uploaded, and there are more videos that will be followed after this video. If you like my video, if you feel that somehow I am able to clear some of the doubts, or I am able to give you a direction towards a particular term or a field of study, then it would be very, very kind of you if you can please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This is Dr. Shoykot Banerjee signing off. Thank you very much for watching my video.